Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate the witnesses' testimony here today and their willingness to help us out. I'm just a business guy, and as an outsider looking at this process, my experience has been that nothing damages small businesses more than overregulation. I've been involved in small business. I've been blessed to be involved with some of our country's larger businesses, and I remember Sarbanes-Oxley and a few others, and now we're dealing with Dodd-Frank. It just seems to me that small businesses today in this recovery in the United States are really having trouble getting going. And they're, as we know, the employment engine behind our economy. As a matter of fact, 2 months ago, Goldman Sachs Global Investment Research Group published a report, I'm sure you've seen it, calling this economy a two-speed economy. Some large firms are prospering, outperforming market expectations. Meanwhile, employment and growth in small firms is substantially lacking industry averages and certainly larger companies. The most telling, though, is the number of small firms have declined in the last 5 years. This is the first time since 1970. I'm really troubled by that dynamic because I see it in my home state. I see it manifested from the workers of those small companies who are really burdened now by reduced working hours and so forth. So the people and families of Georgia are really hurting because of the overregulation. The number one topic I hear when I travel back to my state among business people is the regulations are taking the life out of our free enterprise system. So with that, I just have a couple of questions. It just seems like, first of all, there are no innocent parties in Washington. This is not something that just happened. It's been ongoing for the last 50 years. But we now get to a point where it really is hurting our competitiveness around the world. As Justice Breyer said, well-meaning, intelligent regulators trying to carry out their regulatory tasks sensibly can nonetheless bring about counterproductive results. The single-minded pursuit of a particular goal results in regulatory action that imposes high costs, sometimes without achieving significant additional safety benefits. It seems like we've gotten to the point now where our federal government wants regulators to take all the risk out of our lives at the expense of our free enterprise system. So the question, I've got a couple. I understand that, the regulations that we have in the U.S. are divided into 4 big categories: economic, environmental, tax, and ocean homeland security. The question I have is has there been any attempt to standardize an approach to this cost-benefit analysis approach across these regulatory agencies? And has there been an attempt to standardize how we calculate the cost these regulations bear on each of these, or from each of these categories? I'll throw it to Professor Pierce first. I'd like all the panelists to respond, if you will.
I think there have been a lot of efforts of that type, Senator, and there's a professor who's on the University of Virginia faculty named Michael Livermore, who has done a wonderful study of the way the cross-fertilization works between, for instance, OIRA and EPA, that each of them looks at the literature all the time, and then often EPA will hire consultants to help them figure out how to do this, and a lot of the methodology developed in a regulatory agency is shared. In fact, I think virtually all of it with OIRA, and a lot of the methodology that OIRA wants agencies to use is shared with the agencies. Your reference to Sarbanes-Oxley, though, does take us back to most of those agencies are independent agencies. They are not subject to any of this. And so this excellent approach simply doesn't apply to some agencies.
Could I add as you mentioned Sarbanes, could I also ask you about CFPB, since it's not under congressional oversight at this point?
It too is not subject to the requirement of conducting cost-benefit analysis to take a major action. So it's one of the many independent agencies that are not subject to the executive orders that Professor Dudley and I have discussed today.
Okay, Professor Dudley?
Yes, so I agree with your concern and with Professor Pierce's response. There are guidelines that have been adopted through notice and comment. They're long, they're hefty, they're generally recognized as solid guidance, but they're not always followed, and that's partly because there are statutes that preclude consideration of some important trade-offs. So that's part of the problem. And independent regulatory agencies are not covered. If agencies don't do it well, they rarely face judicial review for that. There are some statutes that allow it, but not the executive orders that require that are not judicially reviewable. So I think there are several reasons why you're right that agencies are not really doing as robust a benefit cost analysis as we could, which might get back to Senator Enzi's suggestion that maybe we should be codifying the executive orders that require that type of analysis.
Minister?
Senator, I'll just confine myself to a couple of basic points. One is Prime Minister Harper of Canada has called red tape the silent killer of jobs, and I think he's absolutely correct. And that's why this was part of our previous election platform that we have implemented over the last 4 years to reduce that burden on small businesses. The other thing I'd say, something that you already know, but that if you don't measure it, it doesn't count. You know, in government, if you don't have a means by which you are assessing the costs and benefits, then it becomes just a moot debate. And so I do, certainly my experience has been, as we have measured this more and more closely and more precisely, it creates the dynamism necessary to actually get something done that's different.
In Canada, have you guys been able to standardize across your various platforms as well?
So we use something called the standard cost model, which is an internationally recognized calculation as a formula, basically, that assesses the administrative burden on business, looking at the number of hours it takes to fill out the forms, times the number of people necessary to do so, times the number of businesses affected. I'm very much simplifying it, but that's the basis of it. And as I say, it is an internationally accepted methodology, and it seems to be working.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.